Alrighty, so my name is David Perlman. I'm director for Modern Workplace, which so I spend a lot of time working with our education customers in K through 12 and higher ed, and our great partners like Enabling Technologies. We've spent a lot of time over the last 2 years really focusing on the cloud and understanding what are the things we need to really help our customers evolve and not only protect both the identities and the data, but also really continue to advance our security around everything that we're doing. And so today we're going to talk about a number of different technologies. We're going to break them down a little bit as we get into this conversation, but the main points to remember is you already own probably some of this. So if you own things like the Enterprise Mobility Suite or Azure Active Directory or Advanced Threat Protection, those are some of the pillars that Phish Hunter scenario is built upon. Depending upon what space you're in, if you're in some of the managed accounts, please work with, reaching out directly to me, and I'll put in my email address, and Eddie will do his as well. And there's also some opportunities where we can help put some of these up in a live environment. And we've done that at a bunch of different organizations already. So again, really appreciate your time, and Enabling is a great partner to work with, and great to be working with Eddie again.
Thank you, David. I appreciate the introduction. As David mentioned, Enabling is a partner focused exclusively on Microsoft. We've been in business for over 25 years and focus exclusively on Microsoft technologies. We've done over 500 migrations to Office 365, several voice implementations with Skype for Business, both on-prem and in the cloud, and we are excited to work with Microsoft on this Phish Hunter solution. So to kick it off, I know that everybody's aware of phishing, and we all see the news headlines, but I wanted to spend just a minute talking about this because as David and myself and other members of Enabling have had these conversations, this is something that your peers are very worried about, and many of them actually come to us after the fact, after they've already been phished or after they've already sent a direct deposit somewhere else. So I just wanted to share a few examples that we're actually seeing. And why EDU is such a large environment. In the education space, you have a very small team that often has to protect thousands, if not tens of thousands of students. And in the enterprise, they have whole teams dedicated to monitoring Office 365 and ensuring their users are protected and have an unlimited budget to train their users. But in EDU, you're much leaner, and so your audience is very large, and there's a low IT to number of users ratio. So that's why so often we see attackers coming after EDU. And we see the ones in the headline, whether it's in the greater Atlanta area. I won't name out any customers, but they're all in the news. It's all public information. In the greater Atlanta area, they had 200 or 300 teachers that were compromised, and their direct deposits were redirected to the attacker. In the Carolinas, there was a customer that lost over $1 million. They were phished for nearly $1 million. And, of course, everybody's seen the Equifax attack. But there's a lot of those headline makers are out there. But as we talk with customers, they're also encountering this on a day-to-day basis. One of our customers actually called it whack-a-mole. He's so busy running around chasing these phishing attacks that he doesn't have time to lift his head up and actually take a proactive approach. One we saw out in Texas was at the beginning of the year, an attacker sent students a phishing email. Several students fell for it and actually gave up their credentials. But even more importantly, their credentials also had access to their direct deposit. The school was very proud that they had single sign-on and that the students only had to maintain a single source of identity. Well, once the phishing attacker had these emails, he went in, changed the students' direct deposit information, and then withdrew them from class. And what this did is all of a sudden students were unenrolled, and their tuition was then redirected to the attacker's bank account. And this wasn't like 2 or 3 students, it was a large number of students. That's a common one that we've seen. Also, we've seen a lot of spoofed Office 365 landing pages. We see some that look like a joke, but we see some that are very well done. And over half of our customers are aware of spoofed Office 365 landing pages, but I bet you there's even more out there that they're unaware of. So those are some common trends. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the issue because I know you see it and hear about it. But in conversations with your peers, these are a few of the common trends we've seen. Chris, did you have a poll you wanted to put on this? I believe.
Sure. Let's see from you. Good morning, folks. This is Chris with Enabling. Let's, if you would, tell us with a click here where you see the most damaging kind of attack going on in your organization. Is it where faculty and staff are getting phished and their payrolls getting hijacked? Is it where students are getting their credentials phished and they're losing access to classes or other financial info? You see suppliers soliciting you guys yourselves from payment from your procurement group. We see lots of internal noise from phishing going on. Once an attacker owns an account, they'll likely try to phish others to try to get to the global admin or to a high-ranking official and look to internally phish around. So that's the fourth one where we see internal phishing. Or is it something else or nothing? So thank you for those of you guys that are willing to contribute there. These are kind of the main high-flyer ones to watch out for. And while I have the mic, I want to make sure I mention one thing. And that is, as to number 3, the suppliers soliciting payment from you guys when there's no reason to. This just happened last week with the SEC, and it's critical that you explain to your users that even if the email comes from a valid source, it may be an internal source, and it's an unexpected link or an unexpected attachment. Try, and I know that's the operative word, to get them to call that person before clicking or opening. Since the SEC was sending Word documents from a legitimate individual to these businesses here in the U.S., the business would open up the email assuming, gee, this is from our colleagues at the SEC and they're asking for info. Open up the Word doc, and even though Word prompts you with warnings of files from the internet having viruses, they'd click through, and all of a sudden they're attacked and they're owned. And so you're not immune. Even if you've stopped phishing from getting in, you're getting victimized from the outside. And so the people and process is important as the technology to do so. Thanks, Eddie.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that. So to talk about what Phish Hunter is, oh, and let me change this back so everybody can see it. Manage content.
You just need to take over as presenter at the top.
All right.
What was some of the feedback you got from the group in terms of what people thought were the biggest challenges they were getting hit with?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was shown to everybody. The number one thing why I commented was that they were seeing bogus requests from suppliers in their procurement group.
Okay. You did mention that. Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
So on this slide, what is Phish Hunter? And it's easier to talk. I want to be sure we're clear what Phish Hunter is not. Phish Hunter is not a software or specific product that Enabling sells. It's not this kind of bolt-on to Office 365. You pay a fee and it's just flipped on. And it's not a separate licensing SKU from Microsoft. There are licensing requirements, but this is not in addition to. It's also, and I'll come back to the patient zero, but what it is it's a consulting engagement where Enabling comes in and leverages and relies on Microsoft's existing technologies. So we're just adding framework and logic and workflows on top of Microsoft's technology inside of your Office 365 tenant. So this is something we do, and at the end of the engagement, whether it's a pilot, a full-blown deployment, you own it. There's no support contract or managed service contract. It's something that we deploy for you, and then you own it. It's what Phish Hunter is also not is it's not going to protect patient zero in terms of actually getting those credentials compromised. No email filter is perfect. ATP does a tremendous job and will cut down on a large portion of those emails, but inevitably that perfect phishing email will get crafted and it will get through ATP, but that's when through Phish Hunter's layered security, we're able to identify that compromised user and then kill the session. So you will see a huge reduction in phishing attacks, but inevitably something will happen, and that's why we have these workflows built in. So to look at the next page, and this one outlines which Microsoft technologies we use. And in the top left, you'll notice CAS, that's Cloud App Security. This used to be called ASM, but we use Cloud App Security, we use Azure Active Directory Premium, ATP, and these are all very robust tools from Microsoft. Like Cloud App Security itself has over 60 metrics it monitors for individuals. Just tremendous amounts of information. And that's because in the enterprise, whether it's Geico or Fidelity or CSX Railroads, they have teams that manage each of these individual technologies. They may have 4 or 5 people dedicated to cloud app security that can sit there and review the logs. They have people that are sitting there looking at ATP and monitoring kind of in real time where the attacks are coming from and how to educate end users. The fact is, in EDU, I've talked to a lot of organizations, and very few even have one full FTE dedicated to all of Office 365. Like that's Exchange, SharePoint, Skype for Business Online. Very few have even one full FTE, and if you do, very few schools I've met have more than 5 FTE. And so all these tools become so time-consuming that it's impossible for somebody who does this as a single person or only as part of their job to manage all these individual tools. And that's where Enabling Microsoft got together to build this Phish Hunter. And Phish Hunter sits on top of these tools. So let me advance this one. Phish Hunter sits on top of them and tries to sift through and look at which threats are actually actionable and credible. So instead of having 5 people sort through those cloud app security logs, Phish Hunter ciphers through them and only presents which ones are most credible and what actions to take on top of it. So that's how we leverage Microsoft's technologies, and that's what Phish Hunter is. But a critical piece to making Phish Hunter successful at your institution is your knowledge. We have lots of best practices. We can share examples that we've seen. But as we kick off an engagement with a customer, we listen to what they are already seeing. What have they seen in the past? Do they have a local vendor who has been subject to spewing out bogus job offers as an email compromise? One customer we talked about says at the beginning of every calendar year from somewhere in Nigeria, or excuse me, not calendar year, academic year, from somewhere in Nigeria, we get a flood of calendar invites. So somebody gets a calendar invite, welcome back to school, they think they're joining a WebEx, and all of a sudden their credentials are compromised. So this is where we really sit down and understand what you've seen in the past to help tailor Phish Hunter for your institution. Because each Phish Hunter deployment we do is unique. They're probably 70% the same, but that 30% is what really tailors it and makes it unique to your organization. And so your insights make it better. And the other part of this slide is Phish Hunter is an iterative process. You don't, Enabling doesn't come in, stand it up, and say thank you, and you don't touch it again for 6 months or a year. As attackers are blocked, they will become more sophisticated. So it's important to also keep updating Phish Hunter as you see new attack profiles. So we want to learn from your institution, but as your institution grows and goes through changes, Phish Hunter should evolve with it. And so going to the next slide. This is sort of the day in the life of an attacker and how he has to now try and fight through Phish Hunter. So before this email ever stops, Bob the bad guy, he's the one here in sunglasses, he's used to sending tens of thousands, if not millions, of phishing emails and having a large percentage of those get through, but ATP has stopped those. And Bob the bad guy now has to become more sophisticated. So Bob the bad guy actually sends a phishing email that gets through ATP to Sally the student. And this phishing email may say something like, please confirm your email address, otherwise you will be locked out of your account. But Sally the student is driving to school. She gets this email on her iPhone, so she's texting while she's driving, and she has a paper to print off, so she doesn't want to be locked out of her account. So real quick, she gives her email credentials. But what's hard, because this was like a spoofed Office 365 landing page, she still gets through and is able to print out her paper. And then what happens? So now the bad guy has Sally, the student's credentials, and then Cloud App Security detects something's going on. And this may be an impossible login. It may be somebody had a login from a new ISP and then created an email forwarding rule. We work through a lot of these Cloud App Security metrics to detect what's going on. And this is where I'll outline in the engagement a little bit more, but this is where we really learn what's unique to your organization and what creates these threats. So Cloud App Security has said, this looks like a compromised user. And automatically, Cloud App Security can go and take an action on that user. And that action is up to you and something we work with you on. It can kill the session immediately. If it's a high threat, if it's a medium threat, maybe we just want to enforce MFA, or we want to force the user to re-authenticate. But Cloud App Security can now take actions on that compromised user. And even though Bob the bad guy was able to take over Sally's credentials, Cloud App Security recognized that. And after once all those actions have been taken, it then lets you know this is the Microsoft guy, the IT pro at your organization. And you can choose how these workflows are automated and what happens. But ultimately, some workflow will happen, and then you receive the information, and you say, all right, this was a phishing attack. It successfully made it through ATP. But what we want to do is update our ATP engine. So you cipher through, you make sure that user is secured. But then we go and actually update ATP. ATP has a very large definition, library of definitions to help prevent these attacks. But inevitably, this one did get through. So you're going to update ATP, and Bob the bad guy is upset. So now what he's going to do is he's going to go after Pete the professor. This guy is also at your organization. But because you updated ATP, ATP is then able to come down and block that email message that's being sent through. So he successfully got through once. We were able to remediate. You updated ATP, and now Bob the bad guy can't send that phishing email to anybody else in your organization. And with ATP, it filters all of that email internally. So if this student starts spewing emails to other students, this ATP can recognize that email signature and kill it, prevent that email from being distributed. So that was a big workflow to work through, but I want to stop and see if there's questions, or Chris, if there's anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, and we can get you those slides, absolutely. I hope you're able to see them, Hiram, if that's what you mean. Not sure. There may be a last mile problem. There's no problem with this system. So if you exit the presentation and come right back in, that may resolve the issue. So the reason you need to manually update ATP is this. So let's take that SEC attack last week. The malware that was embedded in that attached document that made it through to the businesses here in the U.S. from the SEC rep, that actually had no files associated with it. So no antivirus signature could detect that on the computer. Therefore, no updates could be made to the email spam filtering systems in the world, because that message basically didn't install anything, and the Word doc got through undetected. There was no remediation for that. So that would be the definition of our patient zero, Sally student. But what you can do is, if Sally logs in, and it's actually the attacker from an unknown ISP out there in the world, then you should be able to detect that, and with your little guy on the right there, force the MFA automatically, and then through the manual efforts of putting that URL or that an analyzed file through to ATP, what that'll do is that'll allow all other students or faculty that also have that email in their inbox, if they try to open it, it's going to detect it and block that from further infecting other users. And so when you talk about whack-a-mole, you talk about this tsunami of an attack replicating itself in your organization. That's what we're trying to prevent here. And if you have the automation set up so that you're alerted and can take immediate action on the forensics of patient 0, then you can keep patients 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 500 from being impacted. So that's the beautiful thing here, is the automation of the alerting, and then with some thoughtful programming of ATP, just copy paste the URL, and that message will no longer open for others. If you want to take it even further, you can go and search and purge for that email through the Office 365 Compliance Center, which is frankly included with your E3 or A3 SKUs. So you can go through and search for that email in everyone else's mailbox and purge it. So if you want to take that extra step and not even have them bother to open it and see that they can't get to the URL or whatnot, you can do that as well. So some automated alerts here will get you guys in a better shape to not have to play the inevitable whack-a-mole.
And thanks, Chris. I think a big part to understanding those automated alerts is understanding how and what triggers those alerts. So a big piece of this is also looking at your Office 365 environment and understanding what security groups are out there. And for example, do you delineate between faculty, staff, and students? Most schools do. But then do you delineate between who of those are in your procurement department and which of those are executives, and then create rules based on that? A lot of these engagements we do, we want to get Phish Hunter out there, so we deploy it, at least ATP to stop a lot of those emails. But then we actually take a step back and look at how to bring more identities and information into Office 365. Because then Cloud App Security can do rules and workflows based off of who those users are. Chris, I know Cloud App Security collects an incredible amount of information, and we can do text messages, emails, or just kill sessions, but you mind talking a little bit about this anomaly detection engine and how we put our workflows on top of it to give the schools actionable, credible threats?
Yes. See, the issue with any logging tool is that you get everything. And to look through everything and try to find the one thing is like looking for a needle in a haystack. So with an attack, there isn't just one thing. It may be, yeah, that an obvious one would be a login from Nigeria, and we can certainly detect and alert on that. But there may be more. The attackers are well funded. They're patient. They're not going for the obvious in each and every case, especially when they're doing a spear phish or a targeted business email compromise attack against a specific individual, against the procurement person that can write the POs and cut the checks. So they're going to take some time and try to phish those folks. And what usually happens is there's a watermark or a trail of activity that precedes a phish. That we can go and look for in these logs that day-to-day would look benign and unintrusive. However, if you combine them with other activities that also are occurring in that account, then you have a path and a red alert that you can raise. A great example is a CEO of a financial services firm that was phished, but didn't know it and didn't report it. Nobody ever does because they're always embarrassed. But there was a notification rule set up in his inbox a week before an impersonated email came from his account to his CFO, asking the CFO to transfer $900,000 to a partner, quote unquote, in China. Now, what the impersonator was able to do over the week's period of time when they had breached and set up the notification rule that was ignored, they were able to look at every inbound and outbound email of the CEO so that in that short period of time they could craft the perfect email to the CFO from the impersonated CEO, calling him by his first name and also an abbreviated nickname. The last name was Escobar. They called him Esco. They also wanted the CEO knew of the firm had two accounts, and the impersonated CEO asked the money to be transferred from a specific account for which they use a nickname. So this is what they're looking for, and the average amount of time that an attacker lies in wait before they're discovered like this in an organization is 140 days. So they're spending that 140 days trying to laterally move in your system, trying to find the global admins accounts. So they're maybe just sending more phishing, like Eddie had said, this rash of calendar invites that this one customer is seeing is a simple way to try to compromise more accounts. And they're hoping that nobody notices it and they can spread out. So what we're looking for here in columns from left to right are the various activity logs that are captured by Cloud App Security, the location of the user, the type of device or browser they're coming from, whether they're an admin or not, which is an obvious huge differentiator, whether they've faked their IP address through an anonymous proxy, when it was the last time they logged in, what ISP they're coming from. This is huge because there are many ISPs in Ukraine, Nigeria, etc. that allow spam relays and massive quantities of attacks to come through, as well as the IP address, of course. So all of these things in and of themselves create these long logs. Well, what we're doing is we're combining these elements into a path that we can follow such that if we see one followed by the other, we know to raise that as an alert to you guys. If we see, for instance, a risky email came through at 8 o'clock in the morning, followed at 8:05, say, by a login from an IP address that was unknown. So those two issues are maybe low and medium risk on their own. But if that also at 8:06, there's a notification rule set up, like a forwarding rule, like I mentioned about the CEO having had done to him, then that's a red alert. So all three of those, if you were to try to parse through these logs and look for individually, wouldn't seem like an alert that you could chase scalably when you're looking at thousands of these. However, we combine all those into some logic, and we present those to you guys as a short list of actionable to-dos for you guys to investigate.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for sharing that. So now that we've talked about what we do, let's talk a little bit about how an engagement would look. And this is an example of an oversimplified but very true pilot. And this pilot assumes a few things. This pilot assumes that all of your faculty, staff, and student mailboxes are on Office 365. We assume that the MX record points directly towards there. We assume that your identities are synced up correctly, but assuming that you have this, which nobody has, but assuming you have a quote-unquote picture-perfect environment, what we do is we come in and on day one, we deploy our tools. And these tools are ATP and Cloud App Security, and this begins collecting all the logs, and this is purely to establish a baseline. We want to get that going so that we have a few weeks of data there to actually go and sift through. And then we perform some preliminary forensics and listen to you for examples of whether it's those calendar invites or specific ISPs, and we'll remediate any immediate threats, anything that's clear present danger on day one. But the big goal here is also to get those tools out and begin collecting data. And then we come back a couple weeks later, depending on your environment. So for example, on 15 days later, and then we look at what those logs have created, what's been happening, which users has it been happening to, and this is where we really do the intelligence gathering. And this is not simply done in one day, but we gather all the intelligence, and then we begin to map out some of these workflows. We look at which users are being hit, which attackers are sending the emails, and we kind of build out a framework for some of these workflows, but we don't turn it on. And this is one that this is flexible, but it's out there, and so we have the analysis and we see which workflows would be triggered, and we let that go for another week or two to see, is it triggering false positives? Are we enforcing MFA on somebody that shouldn't be, or should we have actually done that? And so we kind of let that go. We look to see how those rules are performing, and then on day 30, we can enforce those automated workflows. We say, all right, we have a high confidence that we are only triggering actions on those compromised users, and then we can enforce those automated workflows. And after that, assuming this is a pilot, your institution can take Phish Hunter and manage it and tweak it. By no means is enabling taking anything with us. We leave you with all the documentation. It's there. You can own it. Some schools say, wow, this has been great, but I don't have another FTE to manage this process. Enabling does offer security as a service. So these are customized engagements, but it's something we can really only script for you after we've done the pilot. But whether your institution would like it or you would like Enabling to take it on as Phish Hunter as a service, we are happy to do that. But that's kind of what the engagement process looks like. In terms of, Chris, I was going to show next steps, but anything else that you wanted to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, thank you, Eddie. There is one thing, and let me explain. Your tenant will be a safer place if you do some of these things. Your email system will be a cleaner and more streamlined environment, less noise, less phishing. There's a couple things that you also should be doing to protect risks of you guys propagating spam, whether or not you know it. That's kind of a lot of what we see now from our customers, is they don't know about this stuff going on until A, they get a report from a user saying, I didn't get my direct deposit, or I've been canceled from a class and didn't do that. Or B, they may have some more advanced logging setup where they're looking at sent items behavior. A good example would be many people look for a large volume of the same message being sent. Usually a remedial attack would be to compromise one of your end users and use your system as a relay for mass phishing attacks out. For the few of you that have seen your suppliers asking you to change your bank routing numbers or send payments without warrant, that's kind of what they're doing, is they're using an account to be the launch pad. So here's some en masse kind of configs that you need to be making to make sure that email that comes from your environment is legit. So if you've not already heard of DKIM, this is something that you can do and should do for your custom domains. If you're in Office 365, Microsoft's already enabled DKIM for your primary domain. But if you have any custom domains that you've added, any unique suffixes to your DNS, etc., you need to make sure that DKIM is enabled for those additional custom domains. In addition, and on top of that, and DKIM is basically an authentication mechanism that says you are who you say you are, and no one's going to use your domain to spoof. It's real easy to change the to and from fields, of course, and that will put that risk at bay. The other thing is DMARC. You need to enable DMARC in 2 phases. And this, by the way, is a huge governmental issue now in the U.S., and it was announced on Monday that all federal agencies are going to have to employ DMARC and do so by next year at this time, and that's a result of not only the SEC's attack, but many others in the government space. So what you need to do here is do this in 2 modes. DMARC basically is going to tell the world that your university has only certain domain names that it's legitimately going to be sending from, and those emails are always going to come from your specific Office 365 tenants. So there's two steps here. First, you want to enable DMARC in monitoring mode first to identify what all domains are being used and what all systems are sending email from your domain name. So in other words, you may have a support desk or help desk application that sends email on behalf of your domain. So the email is launched from somewhere else besides Office 365. Your recruiting group may use social media to email students or parents from a third party. maybe a MailChimp or a HubSpot or something along those lines. Your development group may do the same to keep in touch with alumni so that you don't get on these spam lists from your own system. Those alternative email locations need to be added to your legitimate list before you go ahead and enable this P=reject in your DMARC settings. What's going to happen is when you hit P=reject, anything else that's sending email on behalf of your domain will be blocked. It's a global kind of propagates through the internet to block others from doing so. So you want to do this in 2 phases. One, to watch out for all those other areas from the world where you're legitimately sending email on your school's behalf. And number 2 is finally, once you have your handle on those and have inventoried those, reject those. So there's a really nice, easy, Phish-free site that you should click to check whether or not you've got DKIM and, well, even before that, SPF. But those should be enabled by default by your Office 365 system. But put in all those custom domains, the ones that you've added for different schools or organizations within your college, and you should then check all those. And then once you've got your DMARC and all of the legitimate domains listed, go ahead and enable P=reject after a time of monitoring. So that's the big picture that can help you help the world, guys, and also keep you from being victimized. Many of our customers here are also worried about the impact, especially to alumni, of your development and alumni relations groups sending email that don't actually come from you to your alumni asking for money, because the moment the alumni start paying somebody else instead of you and don't get that nice thank you note from you guys is the moment they stop donating. So these are big ways to help you keep that from happening. In addition to setting up Phish Hunter, which gives us insight into those inevitable zero-day attacks.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate the advice for the greater community. I have some next steps that I was going to outline, but before we jump into that, are there any questions? Please open up for Q&A, and whether it's I am or you want to come off mute, I'll leave it open a minute or two for questions, and then I will pull up my contact information.
There were 2 questions I had that came in via email, Eddie. One is, hey, I own some of the Microsoft technologies that we have. For example, Advanced Threat Protection, ATP, is part of our Microsoft agreement. Is there things that we can do to make sure that we're leveraging the components that we own in a better way, or does it have to? Is it all or nothing kind of when we think about Phish Hunter? I know it's kind of a bunch of different pieces of technology, but can it help us? Can enabling help us engage a little bit deeper using the technologies that we already have?
Absolutely. I appreciate that question, David. And that's absolutely right. Each university or K-12 organization needs to approach security in a different way. Each environment is unique. So, no, Phish Hunter is not cookie cutter to where you're either in scope or out of scope. The best way to handle that is we would schedule a more of an in-depth deep dive where we'd actually ask you 15 or 20 minutes worth of questions about what's your approach to security, what's your environment look like, and then where can Phish Hunter help, and add how can ATP in association with Phish Hunter and CAS add additional security, and where would it be redundant? So absolutely, we can help you better understand the tools you currently own, and if you, at this time buying additional licenses is out of the question, we can help scope it to where you get the most value out of the tools you currently own.
And then the other question I had was a number of customers on the call have like ATP and AADP, and then there's a bunch of other stuff mentioned. Some of those things are, so you said CAS, Cloud App Security, you talked about, I'm not sure if I saw something in here about Flow, which is kind of a work engine. So a lot of these pieces many of our customers already own. Can they still engage with us really to help, from that Phish Hunter activity as well?
Absolutely. That's where it can we can bring the most value immediately. So absolutely, David.
All right. And then just, for those folks that are on the line that are, there's many folks that I saw some names that are coming in from some of our managed accounts. Please, I'll put my my email address in here. Feel free to reach out directly to me or to Eddie. And, there are some different scenarios leveraging some of the different options we have on the Microsoft side to help in some of these engagements as well. And I'm not going to say too much more than that because we had a fairly open audience today. So hopefully that's enough of that's enough information that folks that have worked with us in the past will be able to help in that. I know in a couple of cases we're already engaged with some of the folks on the line. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. And I appreciate you pulling this together, and thank you for joining us today. As David mentioned, email your Microsoft team if this is something you'd like to learn more about. If you want to reach out to us directly, please do. That is my email directly, and I put a Microsoft form link in the